To the special post-pension reform, post-election edition of a joint meeting of CalSTRS and CalPERS. Hopefully everybody's got a packet. Just a couple of things. It's we're gonna blend the two meetings into one, so we'll be only flipping back and forth between CalSTRS and CalSTRS on a topical basis. But let me just sort of go through on the agenda and in the packet. We have the final results of all the bills on your right side of the legislation affecting CalSTRS, and then one for CalPERS, as well as copies of the presentations. On the left side is the summary that we prepared, that CalSTRS prepared, of the impact of pension reform on CalSTRS. I think there's a similar one from CalPERS that's on your website, I believe. Yes, it is. Yeah, okay. And then also a couple of directives. The one thing I want to make sure that people are aware of is that the directive, the one that's dated September 18th, 2012-04, will not be in effect because the whole change was contingent upon the failure of Proposition 30, which passed. So the issues around the reduced school year is no longer an issue. So you can sort of disregard that. But the other one, in terms of the changes to the earnings limit, but on this one, I want to make sure people are aware of that this directive on the earnings limit, the one dated September 24th, only reflects the legislation that was enacted earlier in the summer, AB 178, does not reflect the subsequent changes that were made in AB 340. That will be in a subsequent, in a future directive that will be coming out in the next couple months. So when you read that, keep that in mind that there are some additional changes that we'll talk about when we do the presentation, but I just want to make sure people are aware of that. So the first thing is the update on state and federal legislation. Then we'll talk about the pension reform impact on CalSTRS, and then followed by a presentation from CalPERS. And then there was a desire last time to talk about an issue, some proposed legislation from CalPERS relating to the CalPERS-CalSTRS election. And then Bill from CalSTRS will talk about changes to the employer address files, and then open discussion, then talking about the agenda for the next meeting. So let me, anything that anybody wants to add to the agenda before we get started? Please remember that if you have a question, to raise your hand and we'll make sure a mic comes through. And if those of you who have questions out remotely, to please send them in and we'll make sure they get taken care of. But without further ado, let me have Mary Ann and Danny come up and give us an update on state and federal legislation. So who's going to go first? Mary Ann?
Good morning, everyone. We've really kept you up to date on legislation as it's been signed or failed throughout the year. But just to recap, at our last meeting, there were 6 bills that still had yet to have a final outcome. So I'm just going to give you a recap of those. First of all, there was AB 340. That's the Public Employees Pension Reform Act of 2013. I'm not going to give any information on that because we do have separate presentations by both CalSTRS and CalPERS. But as you know, that was signed and it does have significant impact to both systems. Our technical housekeeping bill, AB 2663, that was signed by the governor. SB 114 by Senator Yee, that was signed. That has to do with community colleges, and it requires the collective bargaining and employment agreements of adjunct. Oh, which one? Oh, SB 114. AB 2663. SB 114 is on page 5 of the goldenrod. That was signed. And then SB 955, which is also on page 5, that's an investments bill. It's really a permissive bill. The governor did sign it. It allows CalSTRS and CalPERS to give priority over in-state infrastructure products when compared to out-of-state ones that if they're comparable. And then a major one, SCR 105. That's a resolution, and what that does is it acknowledges CalSTRS unfunded liability and it states the legislature's intent to enact legislation to help us with our funding, and it encourages CalSTRS to work in collaboration with stakeholders on developing funding scenarios and presenting those to the legislature. So that's a major resolution that was passed. And one that was vetoed was AB 1101. That would have replaced an appointed retired member or participant with an elected member, and that the governor vetoed. The rest of the bills that we followed, the final outcome is noted on the goldenrod, and we have given presentations on AB 178. But if you have any questions about any of the bills, then I'm available. No questions? Danny?
Good enough. Good morning, everybody. Danny Brown from CalPERS. Mine will probably even be briefer than Mary Ann's, and you guys can get right to what everybody wants to talk about, AB 340. But we obviously didn't have a lot of other legislation that passed this year, with most of the focus on pension reform. And I think the only two bills that we were following that would really have any impact on the school districts or school employers are one of our sponsored bills, AB 2142, which really has to do with health care. So it only would impact you if you're participating in our PIMCA program, but this was giving our board authority to do what's called risk sharing among the health plans, and also to consider wellness programs in the premium setting process for a health plan. So most of the stuff will be behind the scenes technical stuff that kind of transparent to you. What the benefit hopefully will be for you as an employer and also as a member is that we should hopefully see overall lower premiums as the plans use this risk sharing to set their rates and looking at the entire population and not necessarily the population that's in their plan. The goal is for them to kind of reward the plans for effectively treating the patients. So that will be something that we're building into the new RFP process, and that will go into effect in 2014. The other bill has to do with our favorite subject of working after retirement. I know there's a lot of confusion based on a housekeeping bill we did 2 years ago to try to clarify the working after retirement. We added the word temporary, which created confusion. And so there was a couple bills this year that attempted to fix that. One was a bill the governor ran as a trailer bill, SB 1021. And then we actually had to clean up some of the governor's trailer bill in our housekeeping bill, SB 987. But the short of it is we removed the word temporary, and we made some other clarifying changes so that, under your section that deals with school employers, 21224, it should be clear that they have to work no more than 960 hours. They can work multiple years as long as it's in a position that's needed and it's limited duration. And we've also clarified how you need to report. It has to be an hourly pay rate. They can only receive the salary that they would have gotten if they were in that position. No other benefits, no other bonuses, things like that you can report. So hopefully the working after retirement issue is kind of done. I know that the governor has added new things in 340 that we'll talk about later, but hopefully it's, everybody understands working after retirement and how that should work in the 960 hours and what is meant by temporary. So that does it for my report. Is there any questions that anybody has on those two bills or anything else that you may have questions about?
We've been so wrapped up in AB.
I know. I have been too. So, not a problem. My feelings aren't hurt.
Okay. Well, then let's move on to the fun of AB 340. First, we'll hear Joycelyn and Gretchen will talk about AB 340 from the CalSTRS perspective, and then Danny will be back to talk about it from the CalPERS perspective. Or is it just Joycelyn, not Gretchen? Okay, just Joycelyn.
So again, as Ed said, my name is Joycelyn. I work with Governmental Affairs and Program Analysis, and I'm going to go through the different portions of AB 340. I'm going to stop at strategic points and see if you have any questions, so that way I won't run on too long and you won't have to hold everything in. So To start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the bill's logistics. As you know, there was a conference committee on pension reform that held several hearings, and then they drafted their conference committee report, which was amended into AB 340 on August 28th. And they held a committee hearing in the evening, and that's when the committee passed out the bill. And that's the first time that the contents of the California Public Employees Pension Reform Act of 2013 were released to the public. And then just a few days later, on August 31st, both the Senate and the Assembly passed it out. As a conference committee, it's already been through the committee report, it's already been through the process. So once the committee votes on it, it just goes to both floors. They both vote it out, if they're so inclined, and they were this time. And then it goes to the governor, and he signed the bill on September 12th. And from that point on, we've been trying to interpret the language and trying to see how it's going to impact our members and our employers and our other stakeholders. As you know, the bill takes effect January 1st, which is around the corner, and applies to both current and new members, although it applies differently. It applies differently between CalPERS and CalSTRS, but most of the benefit structure impacts are to new members. Sorry, I haven't used one of these before, so that's your first slide. And then I'm going to move on to the second slide because I think it'll be most helpful. I think one of the biggest questions is who's a new member and who's a current member. So I'm going to start off with the new member, which is essentially laid out in the bill, which for CalSTRS are individuals who are first hired to perform CalSTRS creditable activities on or after January 1st, 2013. They are subject to the new benefit structure, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I think probably what will clarify that the most is if we talk about who's a current member, because I think that's where it gets a little bit more confusing. And so let me move to the next one. Sure. Oh, wait, we should have the microphone. Sorry about that. It's coming.
So if an employee was hired, I think Valerie and I were talking, if an employee was hired and say never actually worked, if they were hired back before January 1st of 2013, it's my understanding now that those would be considered the existing employees.
Correct. And I was going to get into that, so but
Sorry.
you went right there. So yes, exactly. A very good segue. So I'll just read the first line and then get into that example first and repeat what was said. And so current members, the opposite of new members, are individuals who are first hired to perform CalSTRS credible activities on or before December 31st, 2012. And as was just mentioned, this includes those, because it says first hired, if someone was first hired to perform CalSTRS credible activities but did not actually perform service, they would also be considered current members. And I'll give an example. Someone may have been hired as a substitute teacher in December. They may have been put on a sub list, but they may not have been called to actually fill in a classroom until February 2013. But that person was first hired to perform those credible activities, the teaching, prior to the implementation of this bill. So that is a good example. And then to go back to a couple of others that could be confusing is those who were CalSTRS members before 2013. If they terminated membership, took a refund, but then decide to come back to teaching or to be an administrator in 2013 or after, those people would be considered current members because they first performed credible activities prior to 2013. And that's whether or not they redeposit. Another example includes those who perform CalSTRS credible activities even if they were covered under another retirement system. So this could be part-time educators who are covered by Social Security, PARS, you name it. But they were performing the activities, they were teaching, so they were first hired to perform those credible activities prior to 2013. So it would also be considered current members, and just to state the obvious per se, they would be under the existing benefit structure. And I see some puzzled faces, so I want to pause for questions here. So, okay, question up here, if someone, thank you.
Your second bullet is speaking of non-members, correct? Those that have chose not to be a member, that their earnings are reported to STRS?
So where it says perform CalSTRS credible activities, even if they were subject to coverage under a different retirement system, generally we would be getting non-member service for those individuals.
So they would be considered current?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, good. Anything else on that? Oh, one more? There.
I'd like to ask a specific question about that. So could that possibly be charter schools?
You know what? That's a good question. I know charter schools have come up, and we haven't talked about it yet. And I really should have checked in. I don't know if Ed has any thoughts off the top of his
Well,
head.
yeah, and this is just sort of initial thoughts, because you have to appreciate we're still trying to work through the language, but it would seem if they were not if prior to 2013, they had not elected to be in CalSTRS, it would not be, I don't know that they would be considered credible activities. So I think it would sort of depend upon at what point in time they elected to be in CalSTRS. But that's a question we'll have to evaluate as we look further. If the charter elected, because they're not an employer, and it's not credible activities until they elect, until the charter elects. But we'll look into that.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify when you said when they are a member of another system. So let's say somebody was a member of PERS system in 2012, but in 2013 they met the qualification for STRS. You are going to honor that as an old member?
If they were performing CalSTRS creditable activities, the way the law is written right now for CalSTRS is that they must have been performing CalSTRS creditable
Creditable
activities.
service. I want to
Yes.
clarify. Thank you.
So, Vina, just to be clear, I'm not sure how that situation ever arises, that a person is performing CalSTRS credible activities as a CalPERS member unless they had elected to be in CalPERS.
I mean, if they were a member of PERS before, let's say they were instructional.
Hold on, wait a minute.
Sorry.
Let's say they are instructional aid
Right,
in 2012.
right,
In January of 2013, let's say
right.
they
But they're not
qualified
performing
in
but
a
they're not
teaching.
performing CalSTRS credible activities in 2012.
Yeah, no, they
Right.
didn't. But they elected STRS from that point onwards.
They
The
would be a-
retirement system,
They would
because
be a
they
new
had the
member.
right.
They would be a new member.
It will be a new, that's what I
Right,
wanted to.
yeah,
Thank
just to
you.
be clear, that's their situation, that person would be a new member. Right,
If that person was not performing CalSTRS credible activities as an instructional aid, if they became a teacher after 2013, they would be considered new the way the bill is written currently. Now, I have a next slide, so if there's any other questions about how the bill is written now, I'll take them. But thank you, Vina, for that question too. It gets kind of into the next slide, which we think that the legislature, because of the way the bill is written for other public retirement systems that have reciprocity, and CalSTRS does not have reciprocity, but we think because of the way the bill was written for those other systems that the legislature intended to allow individuals who have concurrent membership with the concurrent retirement system before 2013, if they join CalSTRS after 2013, they would be considered a current member subject to the existing structure. So that's what we think they meant. We definitely have to wait for cleanup legislation to be drafted to see exactly what they meant, and then has to be passed and signed, obviously, before we can implement that. And that would speak to the situation Vina brought up, which is an instructional aid under CalPERS. That's a concurrent retirement system with CalSTRS. So if they were employed in 2012 and then come to work for CalSTRS in 2013, they would be considered an existing member, current member, as long as they didn't have a break in service of more than 6 months. So does that make sense? It's a little bit difficult to talk about because it's not in the law yet. It's what we think they meant. I think that's the way it's working for other systems, but given the reciprocity language, but we have to go to legislature and get that cleaned up. So we will keep you posted on how that goes. But I think that definitely speaks to that point. More questions on the member side of things, the current versus new members? No? Okay.
What are we doing in the meantime? While you're cleaning it up?
I think you're gonna, I guess I could repeat the question. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry. What do we do in the meantime while you're getting the legislation to clean it up? Do we go by the intent and allow and say they're current?
We're implementing the bill as it is written, so we have to go with what's in the law on that front. But we definitely want you to be aware that this could change in the future. So I can't speak to exactly how your processes should work, but this may be something you want to note to keep track of. This is something, if the legislature meant it to happen, we'll be recommending it for urgency legislation that we hope will be dealt with early in 2013. So we have our fingers crossed that it'll be dealt with as soon as possible. But, you know, I'm not sure how quickly the legislature will actually move on it.
So in the meantime, is it as simple as going into REAP, looking for a new employee, and if they have a record on their account that says member, non-member, cash balance, they're considered current? And if they're not new and we have to add them in, then they're new?
And I'm not sure exactly what REAP is because I'm not in the employer services area, and there are people in the room who might be able to answer that more specifically. But from my understanding, there shouldn't be any changes to the file specifications and what you're submitting to CalSTRS.
No, I'm just talking about looking at a
So,
new employee.
But
to
once
see
the
if
edit
they're
comes
new.
in, CalSTRS will be determining who is a new member and who is a current member based on the way the law is written now. And so CalSTRS will be able to indicate which members are currently new or current.
But also, for the time being, assuming that the board, we'll talk on in a minute, assuming the board does what the staff are recommending with respect to contribution rates, I don't think there's going to be any need for the employer to report to us who's a new member versus a current
No, but on
member.
our side, in setting up the person, on our side, we have to set them up under a different plan with a limit on the deductions and a change in contributions.
We're going to be trying to do everything as information is coming into us, but Valerie's here
Right.
too.
So I'm with Member Account Services. I'm Valerie Ferris, and what we're planning on doing, and this, we have just begun the business requirements phase. So our plan at this point is when you go into REAP and you add a new member, we will feed back to you instantaneously that that person is a member of the current system or they're a new member. It's not something that you will have to determine. We'll determine that for you and feed it right back to you. Okay. This is really Joyce's presentation.
Okay, on your cleanup bill, that's only going to apply to reciprocal systems. It won't look at Social Security, it won't look at PARS or any of those other systems.
Well, it's concurrent retirement systems, and I mean, if somebody was performing credible activities prior to 2013 and they were under Social Security or PARS, they would already be considered an existing member. And then with concurrent systems, so it would be CalPERS, Legislators Retirement System.
So then pretty much in a school setting, because they're either covered by CalPERS and or CalSTRS, if they're not established membership in the system, they're covered by something else, which could be PARS, could be Social Security, but technically they're performing what you're calling credible service, that would make them current members.
If it was before 2013, and it depends on if it's certificated or classified service. If it was certificated, then they would be current members for CalSTRS.
But let me ask you, well, I guess, are you suggesting, like, if someone was performing less than half-time as a classified, and so was not in CalPERS, but was instead in an alternative system? Is that what you're, and then they become then they start performing CalSTRS service, or what's your?
Let's take Bina's example. This person's an instructional aide.
In CalPERS.
They're on the classified side, non-certificated.
Right.
They're not a member of CalPERS because they may not have performed qualifying service.
Okay.
But they're doing creditable service that's recognized by CalPERS. They're just not a member yet. And so going forward with this, would that person then be considered a current member if they went into CalSTRS?
Well, let me ask Joycelyn, the way we've drafted the language, do they have to be performing service in the concurrent system or just subject to coverage in the current system?
I'd have to look. But the way the law is written right now, they would be a new member, first of all. Let me look at the other piece. Employed to perform service in the other retirement system. Right. So that person would have been hired to perform service subject to CalPERS, the instructional aid. And if the law is changed, like we think it will be, then they would be considered a current member if they switched over to CalSTRS. But we have to wait for that law change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a point that we may want to talk to the legislative staff about in terms of how to deal with that. In terms of it's somebody who would have otherwise have been in the system, in the other system, but wasn't because they didn't meet the eligibility to be in it, but they were performing the service. So we can't give you a definitive answer on that one yet, and it's something that's going to have to be dealt with in the future legislation.
That it would be based on hire date, if that's the situation, if that's the case.
Well, it'll be a slightly different standard, but we'll have to, I mean, it's something that we have to keep in mind as we're talking to the ledge staff about tweaking this whole thing in terms of how they want to deal with that particular scenario. But
That's something that we would want to watch out for, that
No,
a
no.
hire date as opposed to maybe a qualification date.
yeah, or a membership date, right, absolutely.
My question is about hire date also. How will you know what date we put them on the sub list? Because there won't be any reported service to you.
Right. No, that's something we'll have to find a way to find out from the employers or from the members. And so that's something that the implementation team is working on, figuring out. Yep. And I know that's something different between CalSTRS and CalPERS too, because the language is drafted differently in the bill. So we have different code sections that apply to us, and it's written differently.
Are you going to call these new members something else? Like, are you giving them any name?
We've asked our communications team, and they've been working with other people at CalSTRS to come up with kind of a name for this new piece of our system.
Tier 2, STRS
I
2
don't know
or
if that's what we'll
something?
go with, but they're still being creative and
Okay,
trying to
so
think of
you will
something.
have a different name.
There will be a different way, there will be a way of differentiating the two groups, but they are in this.
Bring up the screen, we will quickly read, and sometime it might
Yeah,
not
there'll be something.
register
Yeah.
that it is old or new.
But just so it's clear, it is the same benefit program. It's
Yeah.
not like cash balance, which is a separate program, so, but yes, there will be a way of, they'll be in two different named groups.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on that? Okay, now I was going to go into probably the next most interesting part, or maybe they're a tie, but the equal sharing of pension costs and the contribution rates that are laid out in AB 340. And I'll start on the member side. And in AB 340, it says that new members will be required to pay at least 50% of the normal cost or the current member contribution rate, whichever's greater. Provide some details for that. We are supposed to round to the nearest 1/4%. In the future, if we were going to adjust that, it would be based on any changes to the normal cost of 1% or greater. Also, the bill provides for bargaining units can collectively bargain for a higher contribution rate for new members. The bill also says that employers cannot pay the member contribution on a new member's behalf. There is some grandfathering language in there for existing MOUs. And one more point is that the employer pickup of contributions for tax deferral purposes is still allowed. So that's the same, no changes. So I already see question.
Some language that I read looked like that the employee would have to pay at least 50% of the normal plan cost also applied to existing members. So that's not true at all.
Not true for CalSTRS.
Oh, okay.
And I should let Danny speak to it, but I think there's a provision in the CalPERS section that may address that, but I really want to leave that to Danny. But not for CalSTRS. Anything? Okay. Oops, 2 questions. Vina has a microphone.
I know. Actually, I should sit right next to you there. Because I have a list of questions. My first question is that about when we talk in this piece of legislation about the MOUs and all, I'm not 100% sure that I understand that each district has their own MOUs, and then we are the county office. So when they can negotiate independently the rate, because we normally have one rate for all school employers. So how is that going to work?
And I'm not sure how the bargaining process would work, or for individual employers and employee units deciding how they want to do that. But the bill does allow for it. So.
Right now, we don't have a visibility to what's on their MOUs and all. We don't get involved. Is it something county office will have to look into it, what they have?
Are you referring to the issue about the employer paying the employee contribution?
No, anything like the rates and everything.
Well, they're not negotiating the rates.
But they can bargain for a higher.
Oh, they can bargain for,
Higher,
for a higher rate? And I love to think about that. I mean, I don't know, Peter might want to jump in on that. The way that we do it when it's the other direction, where the employer is paying the employee rate, it's invisible to us. It's just a question of where they take the money from. It's possible that we could do it the same way. If the employees negotiate paying a portion of the employer rate, it'll just be reflected as an employer contribution, but we'll have to look to see whether or not there's other issues associated with doing that.
If we can have a clear definition of employer, like is it district for this purposes or county office?
Well, the employer is clearly the district.
Okay.
Yeah, that's clear in the law. That
Okay, and my second part to this question is about the contribution rate, which it says the rate can be either greater than the 50% and all. If for some reason, if we have to make some adjustments, payroll adjustments, are we going to be penalized?
So let me move on to the next slide real quickly, and then we can get into that portion. But if I forget, remind me to come back to that. But I know I have one more question on this slide, because I want to talk about what the board's going to do, either tomorrow afternoon or Friday. So I want to get into that too.
Okay, on an MOU, bargaining agreement or contract that is currently active that allows for the employer to pay the employee's portion of contributions, once that contract or MOU expires, then it's done away for everyone or only the new people?
Right. Well, the interesting part is that in the teacher's retirement law, it says that you have to provide that benefit to the entire class or group of employees. So now, most likely, you will have new members and current members in the same group or class of employees. So we need to go back to the legislature and point this out to them so we recognize this and say, did you mean to do this? Do you want to be able for employers to provide this benefit to their current members? And then if they do, we have to rewrite that section of the law, because right now it has to be consistent across the group or class.
Is that going to be part of your cleanup bill?
Mm-hmm, definitely. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Can you just define quickly what the normal cost is?
Sure. It's the normal cost of the benefits that we pay out. It's how much that would cost. Is it in?
Yeah, what it represents is the additional cost associated with somebody working an additional year of service. So assuming we earn all the assumptions are met around investments and all that, it costs us so much money to pay a benefit for somebody who works. It's different from the unfunded liability, which is the cost of the plan associated when the assumptions aren't realized because investment returns are lower than what we expected. So it's so basically what it's saying is that if all the assumptions were met, the only cost of the plan would be the normal cost, and the member would have to pay at least half that.
And you will provide us with those rates?
Yeah, we'll tell you the board would have to adopt the rate, and Joycelyn's about to talk about that. Another good segue.
Okay. Move on to the next one, and we'll get into that a little bit too. I wanted to point out what the bill says about the employer contribution rate as well. It says that it should be at least the normal cost minus the member contribution rate. So that's what it says kind of in black and white in the bill. And I also want to talk about under AB 340, so the Teachers Retirement Board, like Ed just said, must establish the normal cost of the new benefit structure, and thereby is determining the rates for new members and employers in that sense. Like I mentioned, they're considering an item, the board is, on either tomorrow afternoon or Friday. And the item explains it's not clear whether the legislature intended to apply all the changes that relate to setting the contribution rates that I just went over to CalSTRS. Since CalSTRS has always had the contribution rate set in statute, we're really not clear as to whether or not they meant to give us this authority. And so, and we've heard from legislative staff that, again, in urgency legislation, that they're considering for early next year. I'm not sure if it would be the same vehicle or not, is what I've been talking about, but they want to clarify these provisions of law. So this is another thing we have to go back to them and see what they really meant to do for CalSTRS, since we're really unique amongst retirement systems with the rates being set in statute and consistent for so long and across everybody. Staff is recommending that the board adopt a normal cost of 15.9%. And so that's something our actuaries determined that the normal cost, as I just explained, it would be for the new structure, for the new members, and just including new members, what the normal cost would be, 15.9%. and that we're recommending that that be effective January 1st, 2013. But we're also recommending that the board establish the contribution rates at the current contribution rates, the 8 and the 8.25%, because of the uncertainty that we see coming from the legislature. We don't want to change everything right away when they may not have meant us to do that. So that's why we're recommending at least that the board adopt rates that stick with the current ones that we have in statute. And so and keep in mind though, and I know you're well aware of this, but depending on how the board acts tomorrow, Friday, and how the legislature and the governor act with their cleanup legislation, there still could be different contribution rates between employers because of collective bargaining and between the new and the current members. And I know, so Vina asked about penalties and interest, and so I think if the board does adopt the 8 and the 8.25% by Friday, there's no change right now. And then we'll have to wait for the legislation and see what the legislature and the governor do. And it's something we're aware of, that could cause problems if there's changes to the reporting structure and the format and the file. But right now, again, depending on how the board acts, we're not anticipating those right away. So, and I do want to mention here that Member Account Services is planning on sending out a special edition of the Employer Connect newsletter after the board meeting, so it should be coming out soon after November 9th. So there'll be more information. They'll explain what decision the board made, at least. So that's on the contribution rate. So it's still in flux, and so we'll be looking at that if they do change in the near future, how that will look for the employers and what we may need to do with penalties and interest and what we may need to do for reporting and things like that. But our recommendation is no changes right now. Any questions? Okay. I'm going to move on to and I keep calling it a benefit structure, but Ed is right. It's not really a different benefit structure for new members. There's just a few new caveats to how we'll be looking at their contributions and their pay and things like that. So we're starting off with the compensation cap. And this obviously is for new members, and the cap is equal to 120% of the 2013 Social Security wage base, and that's for CalSTRS members. They're not in Social Security. So the dollar amount is $136,440. Now this number would be adjusted using the Consumer Price Index. Anything above the cap doesn't count toward final compensation for members when they're calculating their pension benefit. As an employer, you can offer a defined contribution plan for any contributions on compensation above the cap. And so also either tomorrow afternoon or Friday, the board is considering another item about defined contribution plans that CalSTRS may be able to offer to members who find themselves in this situation. And so they'll be making a decision on that in the near future as well. This is another one where, like Valerie said, I think we have an edit that came up front, so we could let you know that somebody has reached the cap and the contributions don't come in beyond the cap. There'll obviously be some situations with multiple employers, or if you have a new employee, where someone may go over the cap without you knowing. We'll do our best to set up the system so when you get the notification right away, and don't send in the contributions in the first place. But if money accidentally comes in, I think we'll be able to refund it or some sort of process like that. Question? There's a microphone coming. Oh, wait. We got to bring out the microphone, but go ahead.
So with that cap, there's going to be a lot of administrators that are going to hit that. And so does that mean that both member and employer contributions will stop?
Thank you, Brian.
So you're saying that CalSTRS expects to monitor that and inform the employers, and we don't necessarily want to set up our IT systems to look for that and say midway, okay, this month in salary they're going to hit that cap, so only take contributions up to this amount?
I mean, I'm not sure if it would be helpful to have your own individual systems adjusted to do that sort of thing, but we're not envisioning that, and we're not requiring you to monitor that. We would be looking at it coming in through SO and the edit system to look at that. So I can't say whether you as an employer might find it helpful to have those sort of mechanisms Perhaps maybe if you as an employer are planning to offer that DC plan and you need to get ready to set it up and you want to know when you're almost there, I mean, that could be an example of what an employer may need the information for, but not for our purposes. I think we would see it coming in the door and stop it as best we can, except for those couple situations I mentioned. Okay.
That is something on the reporting side. If the employer set that up and we were right on the money, and so we only submit contributions based on the amount that's going to bring that individual to their cap, on the reporting side, it's going to say, hey, you didn't give us all 8% on all this, you know.
No,
the
I think our
reporting.
system will be set up to read that, and that's another thing I think we're envisioning, still having reporting coming in on total earnings, total compensation, so we can see what a full member's contract looks like. So it's because we don't want to run into the issue of if they're getting paid $200,000 and they hit 136 early, that they look like they have accelerated service credit. We don't want them to earn that year right away. So we do still want to see everything, at least is how we're envisioning implementing it right now. But then we'd want to stop the contributions at that point, but we'd still want to see everything going forward, the reporting side of it.
Joycelyn, I think probably from an employer perspective, it probably would be good to be proactive on that side and perhaps, you know, set up your IT systems, but definitely not hard code it because it is going to be changing. So it should be, you know, table driven. So please be aware of that.
Yeah, because that dollar amount will change based on the CPI, so. Thank you. Okay, microphone? Vina does.
Like Francis was using the example, like superintendents who make 300,000 and at 136 they met their limit. So is it ethical they still keep on getting service? Because we are reporting the earnings and all.
Right, so they wouldn't have completed their year of service once they hit $136,000.
Contributions.
Right, so we would still be getting in their earnings and their pay rate, basically. So we would see them earning their service credit each month along the way.
Right.
And then if they didn't happen to work 2 or 3 months, they wouldn't have that service credit. But we would want to see the complete picture.
Okay.
So
Just it looks odd, but.
Right. Yeah, it's a change.
Right.
We want to see them. Let's say they finish the year. We want to see that
Right.
they fulfilled their contract,
Okay.
so that they earned their entire pay rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. And
I have a question from remote attendance. The question is, if employers negotiate to pay more than 50% and later refund, will they be refunded their total contributions or just the 50%?
can you read it again, just to be sure?
If employees negotiate to pay 50% and later refund, will they be refunded their total contributions or just the 50%?
I think that's something we're gonna have to look at. I mean, if it depends on how, that's one of the issues around, depending on how it gets reported to us, because if it gets reported to us as if it was just the employer actually paid it, but behind the scenes they did it this way, we wouldn't have any visibility of it. So that's an issue that we're gonna have to look at as we look at how to implement that provision about allowing the employee to pay more, negotiate paying more than half.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on the cap? Okay. Another good topic of the compensation that is reported to us. The bill defined basically what is credible compensation for CalSTRS, but they defined it as regular recurring pay on a pay schedule. Anything besides that is not creditable. So this is a change from current to new members, obviously. No changes to current members. Again, salary based on publicly available pay schedule counts toward creditable compensation. And this excludes special compensation. It excludes allowances, bonuses, cash in lieu of fringe benefits, payments for a specified number of times, payments for compensation that have been determined to be for purposes of enhancing a benefit. So a lot of things that used to go to DBS no longer are creditable to any retirement benefit at CalSTRS. One thing that is different between CalSTRS and CalPERS is that if a member has an additional assignment, an extra duty, so they are earning more than a year of service credit in a year, that contributions on that compensation will still go to DBS. So that is something that CalSTRS essentially got a pass for. So that's still happening for our members.
Can you repeat that last statement?
Sure. So if a member is working for more than a year of service credit within a year, so they have an additional assignment or an extra duty, contributions on that compensation will continue to go to DBS. So for current members, it goes to DBS, and also for new members. Whereas that other list of items that I read that's also on your PowerPoint presentation slides, those are no longer creditable to either DBS or DB. So, another question?
Just to clarify that is subject to the compensation cap for the new members. So if their extra assignments plus their base contract exceed the cap, then the contributions stop at that point.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Is CalSTRS going to identify the types of special compensations that would be acceptable, such as like your department chairs? Is it a responsibility type of issue or a service issue? Because different districts treat them differently depending on whether, again, release time, no release time. Is it an added responsibility? Is it part of the assignment?
I think if the department chair sees it as an additional assignment, then it'd be reported as an additional assignment. Therefore, it would accrue additional service credit, and that would go DBS if they go over a year. If they have release time, then it's part of their full-time salary, and it should be reported as part of their full-time salary. Essentially, we're not going to allow the special comps to come in, so the CC6s won't be allowed for the new members.
So is there going to be a definition of what those are? Will you provide a definition of what those are? I know the credible comp guide is out the door, but we liked it. It was a great tool. Can we have something comparable?
We're working on that, yes. Regulations.
There's another question back here. Oh, okay, hold on. Actually, if you could just hang on a second, then we'll come back.
Special allowances such as mileage or general expenses wouldn't be counted, but if they roll those into a salary schedule, then that would be okay.
Correct. And it has to be part of the salary schedule, part of the base pay, so that's also something.
Have a president of a college who is receiving $400 a month for travel, but then they increase their base pay by $400 and take away the allowance, then that's okay, reportable.
That would come in as part of their base pay. And again, that's something that probably future raises would be based on and things like that. So I think that all goes into employers' consideration. We'll be right there, Vina.
We might need to repeat his question because the mic was not on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to go ahead? Thank you.
Okay, so if like an executive position was receiving a $400 mileage allowance, but then they rolled that into their base salary and took the allowance away, then that would count towards their salary schedule, not as a excluded allowance.
That's correct. Thank you for repeating it for us.
But I think it's important to recognize it has to be payable to everybody in the class, but also consistently throughout their career. So if they go back and forth between whether it's in or out, it could end up being, from our determination, it could be considered to be spiking, in which case it'll go to DBS. So if you're going to make a permanent change that there's no longer going to be paid, let's say, auto allowances to anybody, it's all going to go into salary, and that's the way it's always going to be, then that would probably work. But if you start playing games with it, then you might run into spiking issues.
So if you mention that as throughout their career,
well, obviously not their career, because I don't think they were lifelong presidents.
And so I'm thinking if you had a president of a college who was getting the allowance and then they changed it to part of their salary, then they retire and they bring in a new president and give them the allowance back, and then they roll it into their salary, and then they have a new president come in and they give them the allowance again, and then as they approach retirement.
That would look odd.
I know it would look odd, but
I mean, I think the best thing to do, quite honestly, is just put it in the salary schedule and be done with it. Because otherwise it's going to get hung up, and and it's more than likely not going to work, and then they're going to be, it's just that's clearly the intent. If you want to have something count, just put it in the salary schedule, be done with it. Don't take it in and take it out as depending upon the age of the employee. Because it could easily, I mean, under the law, that, I don't think that would meet the test for consistent treatment of compensation. And therefore, it's going to go to DBS, and it won't go into final comp.
And since this is a new member, it actually wouldn't go into DBS either, so there would be no.
Right, that's true.
No, it wouldn't be creditable anywhere for any benefit if it was found to be spiking.
That's true.
And looking at that issue as opposed to having something put into salary, base salary on a salary schedule, if there's contractual agreement and or contractual language that says it is to be rolled into base salary, yet it's not on the salary schedule itself, is that going to be acceptable? Because it has been in the past.
But I'm not sure I understand what that would even mean.
In other words, you've got a superintendent who's got a contract that says their monthly salary rate is going to be $17,000, but they're also going to have some type of additional responsibility compensation of, let's say, $500 that will be rolled into salary. But if you actually look at the published salary schedule for the superintendent, it says $17,000, yet what's being reported is $18,200 for that person, because that $500 is included in there. Or $70,500.
I think I'd have them put it actually onto the salary, so that it is on the published salary.
So then contractual language is also out the door?
Well, the only
As to what's being rolled into base
You're
salary?
talking about new members, so they don't have contracts. New members don't have contracts, so they aren't employees yet. So, and when you write it, when you have a new member and you're having a contract with them, just put it into their salary schedule.
But some districts don't do that. They write contracts.
Okay, this law only applies to people who become members after this year. There are no existing contracts with people who are not yet members. So you can't possibly have that problem. Just, they should.
If they write the contract for a new person, a new superintendent comes into employ.
Right, then it won't count.
They're going to follow the same contract that they had for their prior superintendent.
Then perhaps you ought to tell them that this is how, that won't be counted as compensation. It's an easy fix. They just have to write, they have to, think a little bit and write their contract accordingly.
I just want to make sure I understand that piece which Francis is mentioning. Let's say in 2013, July, we hire a new superintendent. How STRS and PERS, they always look into the past practice, future, and all that. If the new contract is written, let's say the example she was using, they had 17,000 and then 500 additional. Let's say their new contract already, or the salary schedule says 17,500. Is that going to cause a problem? Like their new salary schedule says, like, is there a percentage or thing that from past and new?
For consistent treatment?
Yeah. Like if they just say now new superintendents will be 17,500.
Because they've rolled in certain things.
Right.
Well, since they're a new member, they're not going to be able to retire for 5 years, so
Yeah, I'm
we'll
just
make sure
saying,
that the
but
consistency is there.
yeah, because you guys request sometimes people who are terminating their information, sometime it doesn't look right to you, so even they're hired, your comp review or I don't know, care or so many different units.
Right, it's one area that we do look at, and we'll continue to look at that.
Right.
I think with the new members issue, if you put it in their salary, then that's what we're going to look at, and if it's consistent for their career, then it'll be counted towards their DB benefit.
But there is no like a percentage cap from the past superintendent to new, the salary went up 12% or 15% like that. There is no issue with that.
No, there's no magic number.
No magic.
And also
Until you call us.
And also keep in mind that they're subject to a $136,000 cap anyway.
Right.
So if they're making more than $136,000, none of this matters. Doesn't matter whether it's salary or whether it's an allowance. If you convert to salary, it's not going to count.
Right.
So it's only an issue for these people that you're looking at who are making less than the
So
cap.
that means you won't ask us for paperwork anymore because it doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter.
Okay. And my, right. I have one other request which Francis had mentioned already. There are more changes in the systems, in the laws, interpretation than we can absorb. So I wanted to make sure we would like that cheat sheet, like AB 2700 guide, because it's very, very hard for the district staff to absorb all this when they are coding information. For current member, they need to take retirement. For new, they don't need to take on car allowance, If we can have like AB 2700 guide. I know you don't like it, but we love it.
And I think the intention is to also put edits into So if we have a new member that CalSTRS is identified as new and you try to submit a CC6, then it would say you cannot submit that for this member because they are new. So there'll also be that sort of help in So for the reporting.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
I want to talk about not superintendents. We give cash in lieu to our current members, and it's special compensation. So our new members, if we get a new member, then cash in lieu is not going to be special compensation. But I'm going to run up against members in the same class being treated differently. Yes or no?
It's not going to count towards, for the new members, cash in lieu will not count towards their compensation.
Exactly.
Yep.
But they can still get cash in lieu. They just won't count towards the
But
retirement.
it's not going to be counted toward their compensation. So I'm
You can
not going
still
to have
pay
any
to 'em.
problems.
No, I mean, you're paying the same compensation to the class of employees. It's just not reportable to CalSTRS.
Okay.
I know there's someone from the field has a question.
Yes, I received the email and it says, I just heard that for any new members, CalSTRS will not accept special compensation. The question is, our system is currently set up to code longevity, department chairs, etc. as 57-0-6. Can we still submit items that are still credible as a 57-0-6 to CalSTRS for new members?
I'm seeing shaking heads, so that's a no. So if it's something that needs to fit into regular recurring pay, it needs to be reported so that it's part of the base pay that we receive as compensation for that member. So hopefully they'll send another email if they need more clarification. Thank you. I know we had another question here.
I have a clarification on your current member bullets. If you have a person who came from another state and they come here to be your superintendent, do they qualify under your second bullet that they're performing CalSTRS credible service or activities if they were subject to another retirement system?
No, because it wouldn't be CalSTRS credible out of state. Yeah. Thank you.
So for the example that they talked about where you would have some cash in lieu would be creditable because they're members, current members, and then you have new members, would you have, you would need to then have separate salary schedules?
No, because the entire class has to have the same, it has to be payable to the entire class. So I think if you have separate salary schedules, it wouldn't be appropriate. So I think
you really couldn't have you really couldn't roll that into a salary schedule because then you'd have to have two.
Well, you'd have to roll it into the salary schedule for the entire class. If you wanted to pay cash in lieu, you would keep it cash in lieu for everyone. It's just some people would have it reportable to CalSTRS and some people wouldn't. So it has to be treated the same across the class. And so if you do have things that are there for everyone, it has to be rolled into the base salary.
I'm not sure this is getting at your situation, but if someone is, if there's a decision made not to offer health benefits and in response to that, you're going to raise everybody's salary, that is not what we mean as cash in lieu. What we mean by cash in lieu is you're offering health benefits and the individual can elect not to get the health benefits and in return they get cash. So that's not going to be on the salary schedule per se. So that's why it wouldn't be creditable. But if you decide to not any longer offer health benefits and raise everyone's salary, then that would be credible because it's on the salary schedule.
Questions? Oh, there's one more over here.
My question is for like doctorates, longevity, etc. For new members, if they're eligible for a doctorate, or they won't be eligible for longevity right away, but when they do become eligible, like after 10 years, it's not going to be reportable. So would we, if it's reportable for existing employees or for a doctorate, if you have a doctorate, you get a 2% stipend, but they're all on the same salary schedule, you have your base pay, and then if you're eligible, you get the doctorate stipend. Would we have to have a separate salary schedule for those who will not be eligible to have that 2% reported to STRS?
I don't think so. I think they all have to be on the same salary schedule. And just again, if it has to be rolled into the base pay for those people who are new. I mean, if you keep it as a separate payment, then it's still special compensation, and it's outside of the definition of what we can consider credible for new members.
Yeah, I think the key is you need to roll it into their salary.
But if you had a bachelor's degree salary schedule and a master's degree salary schedule and a PhD salary schedule for people in the same class, then you could do it that way. Correct?
Peter's nodding. Yes.
Yes.
If they would each have
So
specific
anything-
criteria,
yeah.
I think that they have to meet to be in that.
Anything that you want to add, you can make a salary schedule in the same class with that criteria as the reason for being on that salary schedule.
If the
Right, what you're doing, it's payable to the class, and you're putting on a salary schedule, so it's reoccurring pay, so you're covering it that way.
Right.
So you're just not making those additional payments, those stipend payments.
Right. So, for example, longevity would normally be a stipend outside, but if we have a salary schedule that was 15 steps, but now we go to 25 steps because you don't get an increase for steps 16, 17, and 18, but at 19 you get an increase, and then 20, 21, 22 you get an increase, and then at 25 you get an increase. That's on the salary schedule, so that's includable.
Yes, you got it, Kyle.
there are. Okay. I think I'm going to be getting into some things that may be less complicated for the employers, maybe more complicated for the members, but we definitely want you to know about them too, so that you can communicate with the new folks joining your staff. From now on, the final compensation period for new members will be based on 3 years, regardless of years of service. So right now, if you have 25 years of service, you can earn 1 year final comp, so that's no longer available to new members. The replacement benefits program is going away, and that's probably something you deal even less with, because it's if benefits for a member are in excess of the federal limit, CalSTRS has a program that handles that. But I think that's off your plates, but I want to mention that that will no longer exist for new members. The age factors have changed, so, and the normal retirement age. Normal retirement age has changed from 60 to age 62, and the age factor is 2% at 62. Early retirement is age 55, and the age factor is 1.16%. That's changed from 1.4%. The maximum age factor is now reached at age 65 instead of 63, and that maximum age factor is 2.4%. And these are different than CalPERS rate or age factors. And then CalSTRS had the career factor. That's been eliminated for new members. Point that out. And this chart kind of lays out, at least in the whole years, what all the different rates are. And basically, members will have to work 2 additional years to reach the rate that current members would have access to. Okay, so I think that was easy. Any questions on those? Next is post-retirement employment. So this is another good topic for you, I know. A lot of this is review, since you had an AB 178 presentation not too long ago, but I just want to cover some of those points for review. AB 178 changed the formula for determining the annual earnings limit, and now it's half of the average member's final compensation as opposed to half the average member's salary. It changed from approximately $32,000 to $40,011 in 2012-13. There is this third-party exclusion for employees that really meet some very specific requirements and are working for a third party. And one of them is that they are performing activities that are not normally performed by employees of a CalSTRS employer. And we haven't thought of anyone yet who would fit under this description, so we've not been able to see anyone who would have an exclusion under this third-party exclusion that AB 178 put in place. As you know, AB 178 extended one of our narrow exemptions for appointments for financially or academically distressed schools. AB 340 extended that for another year, so through June 30th, 2014. Let's see. It also added a prohibition. A person cannot utilize that if they have received a retirement incentive in the previous 6 months. And it goes on to say any financial inducement to retire from any public employer. And just to reiterate, CalSTRS needs to receive, if you're planning to request an exemption under this, which again, very narrow, but if you've gotten an appointment from one of the specific appointing authorities, CalSTRS needs to receive the form and the substantiating documentation before the member starts working. So it needs to be in our hands before they start working. And probably the biggest thing that on this front that AB 340 did was it extended the $0 earnings limit that we have for people under normal retirement age. It extended it to all members, regardless of age. Now, obviously, the current law stands for those under normal retirement age, but starting January 1st, if a member retires, and regardless of what age they are, they'll be subject to the 180-day separation from service requirement, but actually for us, it's a $0 earnings limit. So they could come back to work, but they'll have their benefit reduced dollar for dollar for what they earn. So that's been, and it's the most recent retirement on or after January 1st. So if a member retires today, they won't be subject to it. Over normal retirement age, to be clear on that. But if they retire January 1st, they will be subject to it. I know this is, again, different from the way CalPERS law reads, so I want to make that distinction. If a member retired in 2012, decides to reinstate in 2014 and retire again, obviously, they would be subject to the 180-day period with the $0 limit. Okay, now to make things a little more complicated, there is a very narrow exemption to this $0 earnings limit. It's pretty specific, and you have to kind of jump through a lot of hoops. And it has to be for critical vacancies. The person must be at or above normal retirement age. The governing body of your employer, so the school district or the governing body, must approve this position through a resolution at a public meeting. So that's a pretty big hoop. They can't have received a retirement incentive or financial inducement to retire, and their termination of services must not be a factor in their hiring. And again, we have to receive the form and the documentation before they can begin work to have access to that exemption. Any questions on the post-retirement pieces? Okay, there's a question up here. Thank you for waiting for the mic.
I just want to confirm normal retirement age is under the new system right now. I mean, whether they're current or not current.
No, it depends on whether they're current or new. Oh. So current members, their normal retirement age is still age 60. The age factors, the current age factors apply to them. And for new members, it would be 62. Yeah. Thank you for making that distinction. Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to make sure I got this one. When you said if they get reinstated in 2013, after retirement, then when they re-retire, they will be under the new formula?
Yes, they would have to have the $0 limit for 180 days, yes.
My question is that whatever they had previous to reinstatement, let's say they had a career factor or longevity, that will still be restored, right? Mm-hmm. And they will get that part separate and a new calculation.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the calculation of the benefit is based on the existing formula. The only thing they're subject to is a new 180-day period of a zero earnings limit.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. it's kind of separate from the new member piece because this applies to everyone, but go ahead.
Joycelyn, can you just clarify, termination of service is not a factor in hiring? Did I miss that?
And I wonder if I can get the exact language for you here, but basically that one of the things would be that they aren't being hired to fill the seat that they just cleared. But let me see if I can find it quickly for you. The way it reads in the law is a finding, so this would be a part of the resolution. It would contain a finding that the termination of employment of the retired member with the employer is not the basis for the need to acquire the services of the member. Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, thank you. Anything else on post-retirement employment? Okay. And again, this is really for members, but want to make sure if they come to ask you questions that you know how we're handling it, as AB 340 prohibits the purchase of non-qualified service or airtime after 2012, so starting in 2013, and we need to receive their request, a member's request to purchase airtime by 5:00 p.m. on December 31st, 2012. So it needs to be in our hands, date stamped before that time, or else it'll be denied. Also, this is something that hasn't changed, but just to remind members, they need to be vested with 5 years of service before they can submit that request to purchase airtime. So that's just something, a reminder. Okay, question up here. Okay.
Thanks, Brian. This is actually probably more for Valerie, but as far as the airtime purchases and the vesting, I know we have a particular situation in our county. One of our superintendents won't be vested until November. And of course, that reporting will be done at the end of December, beginning of January to CalSTRS. So at the time the CalSTRS receives their application for airtime purchase, they won't show them being vested. So we've advised them to go ahead and submit their application with a note that says, you know, why I will be vested as of this time. Please don't reject me. Call Suzanne Rutherford if you have a question. Right. Is there something else we should be doing in a situation like that?
No, I think that that's helpful to include the note. One thing, we do know that situation will occur. They do need to wait until they basically think they will for sure be vested on. So even though we haven't received the reporting, they know they're vested. That's helpful that it's November and not December 31st. Right. But so they can get it in between November 30th and December 31st. We'll have it in our hands, and then we can check later once the reporting comes in to verify that they had the 5 years when they submitted it.
Okay. So you won't summarily reject it?
No.
Okay.
Especially if they're close, I think that our account, the unit that does the service credit purchases is looking, and they realize that there will be people that the reporting hasn't appended to their accounts yet. And so they may look like they have too few years of service credit, but it could be coming in.
Oh, great.
Reporting.
Okay.
So yeah, we're aware of the
Thanks so much.
of that. Thank you. I do want to mention that the law has not affected purchases of any other kind of service credit, permissive service credit, or redeposits of refunds. So that hasn't been affected. And kind of a little bit off topic, but I want to make a mention because we've heard rumors out there and we just want to squash them and let you know that this bill has made no change to the conversion of unused sick leave to service credit at retirement. So that can still be done. So people do not need to worry on that front. So that's that. Okay, and then the last few on AB 340, felony forfeiture. If a member commits a work-related felony and is convicted, he or she will forfeit the benefit accrued from the point of the first commission of the felony forward. So that is part of AB 340. It does say that the member can keep the benefit that they earned prior to the commission of the felony, but not after. The bill does say that the employer and the member must notify CalSTRS within 90 days of the conviction that that's happened so that we can make the adjustments we need to. The law also does say that the prosecuting agency and the member must notify the employer within a certain amount of days. So you should be hearing from someone if this happens, and hopefully it doesn't. So encourage people not to commit felonies. Also, and these last two are probably fairly quick, but no retroactive benefit enhancements. So if there is ever a time, again, we usually see benefit enhancements coming through the legislature. If they ever wanted to grant that again, it would have to be on service credit going forward. And then no pension holidays. So CalSTRS has not ever done this because our contribution rates have been set in statute, but some other retirement systems have not always paid the entire contributions for their systems. So this is not really a change for CalSTRS. Okay, and that's AB 340 in a nutshell. I did want to mention, I think Mary Ann did a good job of covering SCR 105, but again, it's dealing with CalSTRS funding in general, and so we're looking forward to, working on developing those funding plans with stakeholders, and there'll be, representatives of employees, employers, Department of Finance, the legislature. We're working with lots of different people to develop those funding plans, and the resolution states, the plans will consider gradual incremental increases in contributions to address the long-term funding needs of our DB program. The bill, or the resolution asks that we provide those to the legislature in February, so we'll be working on that. And the resolution also expresses the intent that there be legislation in this coming session, 2013-14, to address this. And I see that there's a question from the field.
Members prior to 2013 who terminate membership and are rehired after January 1, 2013 are current members and not subject to the 180 days, but if they re-retire and are reinstated, they are considered new members and subject to the 180 days. They want to make sure they understand that correctly.
The 180-day break isn't dependent on whether you're a current or new member under PEPRA. So that's the first thing. It applies to everyone regardless of when you were hired to perform credible activities. So that's just across the board, current and new members. The differentiation is that if there's somebody who retires today, they would not have to, and they're over normal retirement age, they would not have to sit out the 180 days to avoid the $0 limit. If they retired January 1st, they would have to sit out the 180 days. I made the distinction about reinstatement because if someone has been retired in the past, obviously if they're over normal retirement age, they weren't subject to a $0 limit. But if they do reinstate and then the law goes into effect January 1st, then they would be subject to it once they re-retire after reinstatement. So I hope that helps clarify for them. Any questions on SCR 105? Oh.
It's not about 105. I just wanted to make sure about when people retire, and then let's say in 2013, and then they are rehired again. I understand the 180 day that they have to wait. But let's say if in order to retire, you have to terminate them in the system. But if a district wants to rehire them, let's say next day, and the employee doesn't work, and sometimes they want to rehire them so they won't have to do fingerprinting, some other issues involved. Do you see any issue with that? Like they are not working, so 180 days will still apply, will be all right because there is no money involved. It's just they are active on their system.
I think, well, if they're not earning any money, we wouldn't see any money being reported to us, so there would be no way we could deduct anything from their benefit. But
yeah, the limit. What the law literally says is that there's a $0 earnings limit during the 180 days, so you're not earning anything.
I just wanted to verify because I don't see any concern, so I thought I'll.
But I think it's important that you don't have them working during 180 days and then pay them after the fact because it's
Good point.
Just to be clear.
Okay. Any other questions on SCR 105, AB 340? I was going to talk about next steps next, so you can know kind of what we're working on. An implementation team has been formed here, and we're working on, again, combing through the law and making sure that we know what changes we need to happen to our systems and processes and trying to make them as not exciting for you as possible so that you can continue on with the way you've been doing things. And of course, we'll notify you as soon as possible if the implementation team comes upon anything. Like I mentioned earlier, there will be a special edition of the Employer Connect going out after Friday's board meeting. It will have information on the bill in general, but also on the board's decision regarding the contribution rates. So that'll be hot off the presses. There'll be a more detailed directive going out for you in December or January. And Member Account Services is going to start offering training and info sessions beginning in mid-November, so that you will know how this will impact you more personally than this presentation has been able to do. And of course, we'll provide updates as appropriate to EAC, and they might be more training specific or more specific on the law side of things. So we'll see what we need to do in the future, and we'll be back. Also, like I had mentioned, there's cleanup legislation, working on drafting that and having conversations with the legislature to make sure that we know their intent and we help them have it work for CalSTRS so that it can work for you. So that's all that I have. Any other questions? Okay, great, thank you. Thank you.